The conversation began during what should have been a routine flight from Madrid to Turin for a Champions League match. But 30 minutes into the journey, Captain Miguel Restrepo made an announcement over the intercom that was different from his usual updates about altitude and weather conditions. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some minor technical issues that require us to return to Madrid for a precautionary landing. There's no immediate danger, but I want to ensure everyone's safety by having our maintenance team inspect the aircraft before we continue. What Ronaldo and his teammates didn't know was that this calm, professional announcement masked a decision that had required extraordinary skill and experience to make, because Miguel had detected a subtle vibration in one of the engines that most pilots might have dismissed as normal variation, but which his 23 years of flying experience told him could indicate a problem that would become dangerous if they continued the long flight to Italy. After the safe landing and while they waited for a replacement aircraft, Ronaldo found himself in conversation with Miguel in the airport lounge, initially just thanking him for the cautious decision-making that had potentially saved their lives, but gradually learning about the remarkable journey that had brought a Colombian immigrant to become one of Europe's most respected commercial pilots. A story of determination and sacrifice that would fundamentally change how Ronaldo thought about the immigrant experience and the barriers that talented people face when they're forced to rebuild their lives in new countries. Miguel explained that he had originally trained as a pilot in Colombia's Air Force, where he had flown complex missions in challenging conditions and earned commendations for his skill and leadership. But when drug violence made it impossible for him to safely raise his young family in Bogotá, he had made the difficult decision to immigrate to Spain, leaving behind not just his home and extended family, but also a successful career that had taken him 15 years to build. The transition to Spain had been far more difficult than he had anticipated, because despite his extensive experience and excellent safety record, European aviation authorities required him to essentially start over, completing new certifications, language requirements, and training programs that took 3 years and cost more money than his family could afford, forcing him to work night shifts at a warehouse while studying during the day and supporting his wife and 2 young children on wages that were a fraction of what he had earned as a military pilot. The hardest part wasn't the studying or even the financial struggle, Miguel told Ronaldo. It was the way people looked at me when I told them I was a pilot. They would smile politely, but I could see in their eyes that they thought I was exaggerating or lying about my qualifications, because to them, I was just another immigrant looking for work, not someone who had logged thousands of flight hours and had experience that most European pilots would never get in their entire careers. The bureaucratic challenges were compounded by cultural barriers and discrimination that made it difficult for Miguel to find employers willing to give him a chance to prove his abilities, as many airlines had unofficial policies of preferring pilots who had trained in European or American flight schools, regardless of their actual experience or competency, creating a system where immigrant pilots were often relegated to cargo flights or regional routes, even when they were more qualified than their European counterparts. Miguel's breakthrough had come when a small charter airline was desperate for experienced pilots during a busy season and decided to give him a chance. But even then, he had to accept lower pay and less favorable schedules than pilots with equivalent experience who happened to have been born in Europe. And it took 5 more years of proving himself repeatedly before he finally achieved the same status and compensation as his colleagues who had never had to overcome similar obstacles. What struck Ronaldo most powerfully about Miguel's story was not just the professional challenges he had faced, but the personal cost of starting over in a new country, including the way his children had struggled to adapt to a new language and culture, while their father worked exhausting hours to rebuild his career, and how his wife had given up her own professional aspirations as a teacher to support the family financially by working multiple part-time jobs that didn't require perfect Spanish, sacrificing her own dreams so that Miguel could pursue his recertification and their children could have better opportunities than what had been available in Colombia. My son asked me once why we had to leave Colombia if I was successful there, Miguel said. And I tried to explain that sometimes you have to choose between success and safety, between the life you've built and the life your children deserve to have, and that making that choice doesn't make you less of a man or less capable. It makes you someone who prioritizes what really matters, even when it means giving up everything you've worked for. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours as they waited for the replacement aircraft, with Miguel sharing stories about other immigrant professionals he had met who were driving taxis despite being trained as engineers, working in restaurants despite having medical degrees, or cleaning offices despite being accomplished teachers, all because the systems for recognizing foreign qualifications were so complex and expensive that many people simply gave up and accepted whatever work they could find to support their families while their skills and education went to waste. Ronaldo found himself thinking about his own journey from Madeira to mainland Europe, which had certainly involved challenges and sacrifices, but which had been supported by agents, contracts, and systems designed to help talented young people succeed, rather than barriers designed to prevent qualified professionals from practicing their trades simply because they had been born in the wrong country or trained in institutions that weren't recognized by European bureaucrats who had never left their home countries. When they finally boarded the replacement aircraft and Miguel resumed his role as captain, Ronaldo spent the flight to Turin thinking about the conversation and researching the broader issues of professional credential recognition for immigrants, learning about thousands of doctors, engineers, teachers, and other skilled professionals who were working in jobs far below their qualifications, simply because the process of getting their credentials recognized was too expensive, time-consuming, or bureaucratically complex for working parents to navigate while also supporting their families. The idea that would eventually become the Immigrant Professional Recognition Foundation came to Ronaldo during that flight, as he realized that his resources and connections could be used to help qualified immigrants like Miguel navigate the recertification process more quickly and affordably, while also working to change policies that created unnecessary barriers for people who wanted to contribute their skills to their new countries, rather than being forced to accept that their education and experience were worthless simply because they had been acquired in the wrong geographic location. 3 weeks later, Ronaldo called Miguel and asked if he would be willing to help design a program that would provide financial assistance, legal support, and mentorship for immigrant professionals seeking credential recognition in Spain, with the ultimate goal of expanding the program throughout Europe and eventually to other countries where similar barriers prevented qualified immigrants from practicing their professions and contributing fully to their adopted societies. The Foundation's first initiative was a scholarship program that covered the costs of recertification courses, language training, and examination fees for immigrant professionals, but it also included mentorship components that paired recent immigrants with established professionals in their fields who could provide guidance about navigating not just the technical requirements, but also the cultural and professional networks that were often as important as formal qualifications in finding employment. Miguel became the Foundation's first program director, using his own experience and connections within the immigrant community to identify people who needed support and to design services that addressed the real barriers rather than just the obvious ones. And within 2 years, the program had helped over 300 immigrant professionals gain recognition for their qualifications and find employment appropriate to their skills and education. But perhaps the most significant impact was the policy advocacy work that the Foundation began doing, working with European Union officials and national governments to streamline credential recognition processes and eliminate unnecessary barriers that serve no legitimate purpose other than protecting domestic professionals from competition, while also educating employers about the value of hiring immigrant professionals who often brought diverse perspectives and experiences that strengthened their organizations. The personal relationship between Ronaldo and Miguel evolved into a deep friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to creating opportunities for people who had been overlooked or undervalued by systems that measured worth based on where someone was born rather than what they had accomplished. And Miguel often told people that the most important thing about that delayed flight was not that it led to his involvement with a famous footballer's charitable foundation, but that it represented the beginning of a movement to recognize that talent, dedication, and expertise have no nationality, and that societies benefit when they create pathways for qualified immigrants to contribute their skills rather than forcing them to waste their potential in jobs that neither utilize their abilities nor serve the broader public interest. Years later, when Miguel was promoted to chief pilot for a major European airline, he credited not just his own persistence and skill, but also the foundation's support and Ronaldo's willingness to see immigrant stories as human stories rather than political issues. And he continued to serve on the foundation's board while also speaking at conferences and policy forums about the economic and social benefits of recognizing immigrant professionals, qualifications, and creating inclusive systems that judge people based on their abilities rather than their countries of origin.